Okay, so let's start. So good morning for those in Brazil and in the United States. Good afternoon, Trisha in England. And so it's my pleasure to welcome you all at the doctoral defense of Waldir Sampaio, titled Behavioral Dynamics and Neurocorrelates of Interpersonal Information Processing in Cooperative Decision Making. And before we begin, I would like to take a moment to express my sincere gratitude to the members of the Defense Committee for accepting the invitation to participate in this important milestone of Waldir's academic journey. I'd like to thank Patricia Lockwood, Professor Patricia. Thank you very much for accepting this invitation. It's a great pleasure. And Professor Jessica from Mackenzie, thank you very much. Professor Gabriel from Mackenzie as well. Thank you, Gabriel. And my dear friend, Professor Walter Armstrong. Thank you very much, Walter, for accepting this invitation. And now let me just briefly explain the structure of today's session. So Waldir will begin by presenting his doctoral research in like a 30-minute lecture. Following his presentation, we'll move onto the questioning phase. The questioning will begin with the international members of the committee. It's a pattern here in Brazil. We start with people not from the university, out of the university, and then we go to people from the university. So we start with Professor Walter, then followed by Professor Patricia, then Professor Jessica, and finally, but Gabriel, not less important, you will be the last one. And each committee member, you are free to decide the best approach for posing your questions. So you may choose to ask all of your questions at once, and which Waldir will respond to all of them in turn, or you may prefer to ask one question at a time, allowing Waldir to answer before moving on to the next one. So it's up to you, this decision. And at the conclusion of the questioning, we'll go to another room for the final deliberation. Okay. So thank you all again. And it's a great pleasure for us to have an international committee and also Jessica and Gabriel here with us in this board. It's an important moment for Waldir. And so we are really grateful for you guys joining us in this session. So Waldir, you can start your presentation. So it's something like around 30 minutes, and then we move to the questioning phase. So thank you again.
Okay. Okay, are you guys seeing my screen? Okay. So good morning to everyone here, to Professor Armstrong at US. Good afternoon to Professor Lockwood. Thank you all for accepting being here. So today I'm going to present the work I've been doing during my PhD here at Mackenzie. So it's a work about behavioral dynamics and neurocorrelates of interpersonal information processing in cooperative decision making. Just an outline of what I'm going to be talking about. First, I'm going to give a general overview of the theoretical basis of the dissertation. Then I'll share the main goal of the work. Then I'll present the study one. It's a study that basically we try to understand and to respond the most basic question I had in this project, that is the interplay between identity labels and reputational scores on cooperation. After that, we are going to present study two that basically tries to understand if those identity labels are important in cooperative decision making because of some physical attributes that are displayed on face photos, for example. And then we present study three that basically we apply the same semantic design as study one, but using FNIRS to measure neuroactivity on dorsolateral and ventromedial prefrontal cortices, and to investigate the role of these areas on processing this type of stimuli, identity labels, and scores. And then we make, I'm going to make a general discussion. So basically, as a theoretical framework, I started by investigating or discussing a historical debate on cooperative and cooperation studies. That is, are humans naturally cooperative or selfish? So a good part of cognitive science and behavioral science, it's based on the idea that the thing to answer in cooperation studies is if humans are cooperative or selfish. And I'm not saying that it's not a very important question, but the fact is that a good part of the research on this area was mainly about discussing this in terms of dual processes. So if cooperation was an automatic behavior or a deliberate one, but that really lacks clear support from data from recent studies. And the reason why that is not very productive at this moment is that even if we discover if humans are naturally selfish cooperative, for example, right now in the literature, we know that children usually are very cooperative, but that doesn't answer a lot of other things. For example, we do not know where the malleability and the variability presented in cooperative decision-making comes from. So to answer that, another framework that was developed was the value-based framework that basically emphasizes contextual factors like identity and reputation over the discussion of automatic versus deliberative processes. In this case, cooperation is understood by being shaped by subjective value of social cues, processed by some brain areas like dorsolateral and ventromedial prefrontal cortex. So here, the attempt is to explain cooperation on the basis of the information people have when they are deciding to cooperate. So it's a more debate focused on those kinds of information and stimuli and variables than a debate focused on if humans are something or something else. So if we're discussing identity labels and reputation, why those are relevant in contextual decision-making, in the context of decision-making. So first, identity, we know that from literature that displaying face photos influences cooperative behavior. We know that simply seeing, some articles have shown that simply seeing face photos tends to influence cooperative behavior. But also, not only influences, but studies have shown that displaying those face photos increases cooperation, so makes people more pro-social. And also, that is not only restrained to cooperation, but also to other pro-social behaviors in general. And regarding reputation, we know that showing others' previous behavior affects cooperation. And this is because we know what to expect from someone when we know their history or we have something to work on and to make more informed decision-making based on the person's previous behavior. But one thing that's very important here is that it has been suggested that combining face photos with reputational scores boosts cooperation. So seeing someone's faces can boost cooperation when reputation is also presented. So having all that, what we try to understand here is how these identity attributes and reputation influences cooperative behavior and its neurophysiological basis. Because, okay, apparently face photos and some identity labels influence cooperation, but what type of identity labels does that? And every identity label have some correlation with the effect of reputation, or those are very distinct processes. So the effect of reputation on cooperation, it's independent completely of identity labels or something like that. So these are the main questions we had regarding our main goal. So for study one, what we did was a PGG, a public goods game. It's a game where you have usually are four people, but you can have how many people you want. One was the participant, the other three was pre-programmed co-players. And the participant have to decide if they are going to donate to a common pool. And once they do, that money on the common pool is doubled and then is distributed equally among all the participants, even among those who did not cooperate at first. So there is an incentive to not cooperate at all. And also it's a good procedure to start cooperation because mainly you have a similar thing to a production of public goods. In this case, we had 6 groups: the control group, the reputation group, the face ID group, face ID and reputation group, name ID and name ID and reputation group. And the reason why we had all those groups are because they have varying levels of information people have about their co-players. So in the control group, they have absolutely no information. So it's zero information about their co-players, the other participants of the group. In the reputation and in the face ID or in the name group, they have one specific information about co-players, so face photos or names. And they also have a group of reputation, where basically they have a level of information that is more certain in the sense that they are having specific the behavior of the co-players in the past. And also we had a third type of group that have a more bigger level of information because they have a face or a name ID and a reputation. The reason why we included name groups is because we wanted to understand if identity labels matter just when it's face, like some literature has shown, or if any identity label matter in cooperative decision making. So our hypothesis were that compared to the control group, inserting contextual variables would increase cooperative responses. Specifically presenting just face photos should increase the probability of cooperation because it allows a positive effect of observation and humanization and enables mechanisms of reciprocity. So reciprocity is very important for cooperation, but for me to reciprocate to someone, I need to know who that is, and face can provide that information. Our third hypothesis is that regarding the display of reputation indexes, we expect that a cooperative reputation increases cooperation, while a neutral reputation would not differ from the control group, and a free rider reputation would increase free rider responses. So this is a very basic hypothesis. We know that from literature. Also, we predict that by associating reputation indexes with face photos, we expect that photos will enhance the set effect of the indexes because they allow reciprocity. Again, now the participant will have not only the reputation indexes, but they will have a photo of those participants who cooperated in that way. So that might, what we expected is that those photos would enhance the effect of reputation indexes. And specifically regarding groups of names, since names are relevant components of someone's identity, we expect similar effects to photos. Because they should allow for some level of reciprocity and humanization, but not observation. Here's the sample size. I collected over 700 people. This sample was representative in terms of economic background of the Brazilian population and of female and male participants, and also on age. Here are the results. We ran a logistic mixed model to predict cooperation from treatment from groups with the control group as reference. So basically what we found is that Face ID didn't have any effect. This was the opposite of the expected effect, because in the literature, we had some studies that shown that simply seeing face photos would increase cooperation. We didn't find that effect here. When you consider reputation free rider, as expected, participants cooperated more with free riders for players, but when that was associated with face photos, that effect disappeared. So Face ID and reputation free rider was similar to the control group. Also, that happened in the reputation neutral, where when reputation neutral was presented without Face ID, the cooperation level was similar to the control, but when Face ID was added, that level of cooperation increased. No effect was found to name variables, so name didn't have any effect. So all the effect we found was related to face photos. About the discussion of these results, face photos modulated the impact of reputation on cooperation by mitigating the negative effects on cooperation occurrence when facing a free rider reputation, and significantly increasing cooperation when the players appeared as neutral or cooperative. This effect was not extended to the name position. Our findings suggest a hierarchical interaction between reputation and identification as contextual information. So reputation alone is enough to influence cooperation rates, but reviewed identities modulate reputation's weight on cooperative decision-making. Also, this shows some alignment with the value-based perspective, because contextual factors and individual differences influenced cooperation in this results. So from those results, we designed study 2, because in our first study, we did not control the apparent traits of the co-players. We did not control for race, age, and sex. So this was a question that we could make once we had those results, because we didn't control all these variables in the first study. So maybe the results were due to some bias in terms of race or in terms of age or anything like that. So this second study was designed to answer that question. So the question is, do identity traits influence how individuals interpret actions and impressions and perceive reputation? For that, we had 3 groups. The first one was a racial group composition, where we had a race group composition. We had white and black participants that were divided between 8 experimental groups, where they would play with their in-group cooperative co-players, with out-group cooperative co-players, and in-group cooperative in-group free rider co-players and in-group cooperative co-players. So this is a between groups design. We have 8 experimental groups. So basically, white participants were allocated in one of these 4 groups, the same for black participants. The second experiment was with gender group composition. So we have participants that were female and male in the same sign as the previous one. And the same with experiment 3, but here we are talking basically about age group composition. So we had a young participants that whose age were in a range from 18 to 22, and elderly participants who were 6 years old or plus. In terms of instruments, participants played also a public goods game in 10 rounds with the same co-players in all rounds. Co-players were identified by face photos in all rounds. And also we applied, after the public goods game, a reputation perception scale. So after the PGG rounds, participants rated the perceived reputation of their group on a 6-point Likert scale that ranged from not competitive at all to very competitive. As hypothesis, we predicted that participants would perceive similar co-players as more cooperative and less likely to free ride compared to similar ones. So basically, a white participant playing with cooperative white co-players would perceive them more cooperative than when they were playing with black players that also were cooperative. We also predicted that behavior in the PGG to vary by group similarity, with more cooperation towards similar members and less towards dissimilar members. And third, we had a specific hypothesis regarding age, because since studies show that this homophilic similarity effects tends to diminish over time, we predicted that this effect would more strongly affect younger participants' perceptions of cooperation than elderly ones. So the results were, in the race composition group, we found no effect on reputation perception. So here we have levels of reputation perception. So from 0, not cooperative at all, to 5, very cooperative. We found no difference in any of groups. So here are black participants playing with black cooperative players. Here are white participants playing with white cooperative players. There was no significant difference between any of those groups. But regarding cooperation levels, white participants cooperated more with their similar cooperative players than with black players. For experiment 2 in gender composition, we found no effect on reputation perception and on cooperation. The same was found to study 2 on age composition. So we didn't find any effects on any of the 2 last experiments. So discussion, we found that while important in initial group formation, similarity does not significantly control perceptions of reputation or reciprocity in cooperative behavior once groups are formed and the similar individuals interact. The reason for this is that we know that people tend to get in similarity clusters when they are interacting. So apparently that similarity effect does not influence significatively on cooperation, except for the result we had on race differences. This is kind of important because we are basically discussing if similarity still lingers to its effect to other types of interactions. So this also brings some new information on the diversity problem of cooperation. We know that in cooperative literature that diverse groups tend to cooperate less, but apparently our results show that it's not any kind of diversity, it's not any type of diversity that leads to these problems. And also, we suggest that research aiming to promote cooperation should prioritize strategies for facilitating interactions among individuals with diverse characteristics, rather than assuming that cooperation among the similar individuals is inherently challenging. Once we show here that not all similar characteristics are challenging to cooperation. So, in the first study, we tried to answer what was the interplay between identity labels and reputation scores. The second one, we investigated if the effect of those identity labels were due to characteristics presented in them. And now in the third study, what we tried to answer if the neurophysiological processing of those types of information can help to explain their effect on behavior. In terms of the regions of interest we had in this study, literature has shown that ventromedial area and dorsolateral area of prefrontal cortices play important roles in cooperative decision making. Specifically, the dorsolateral is considered responsible for modulating the value of cooperation decisions by integrating information about goals, individuals' motivations, and modulations of expectations. And the VMPFC is considered an integrational hub that attributes value to the options under consideration in cooperative decisions. So in terms of experimental groups, we had the same design for the study 1, with the exception that here we did not use name groups because name had no effect in the first study. So we had different levels of information again, but here we only had the control where participants had no information at all about their co-players. We had one level of information that is a type of more simple information that is face ID. And then we had reputation, and we also had face ID and reputation. We use NIRS to assess neurophysiological data. Here's a probe design for this and in terms of sensitivity. So we were interested in those areas of the prefrontal cortex. As hypothesis, we predicted that variables influencing participants' expectations about other players would increase the LPFC activity, but reputation indices should elicit more activation than photos of faces, since reputation seems to be more closely tied to expectations than photos. And regarding the VMFC, we expected greater activity when participants received more personal information about their co-players due to its involvement in the evaluation system and in the process of social information. Here are the t-values by all channels by condition. So to discuss the results, in terms of the DLPFC activation patterns by group, the control group showed an increased baseline oxyhemoglobin concentration, indicating higher activation compared to other groups, but similar to face ID. Face ID was similar to control. Reputation group showed a lower oxyhemoglobin concentration compared to control and to face ID, but it was higher compared to face ID and reputation group. Face ID and reputation group showed lower concentration compared to control, to face ID and reputation on both ends. So here basically we had the opposite that we predicted because we had increased baseline oxyhemoglobin on the control group and face ID group compared to other people. Compared to other areas, sorry. So the reason for that, that we're trying to explain this data is that the LPFC is also correlated to risk taking and to risk evaluation. When you have no information in comparative decision making, you are making a more risky decision because you don't know what to expect from your co-players. So this could explain this increased oxyhemoglobin concentration on DLPFC in control and face ID groups. Also, the fact that reputation group had a higher compared to level of concentration compared to face ID and reputation group, that is probably due because here you have a more direct information about co-players' behavior, and you don't have an extra information to process like face ID, etc. So it's a more direct result. Regarding VMPFC activation patterns by group, we had in the control group also increased baseline of oxyhemoglobin concentration, indicating higher activation compared to other groups, but also similar to face ID on left VMPFC. So on face ID group, it had a higher activation compared to reputation group, but a lower activity when compared to face ID and reputation. Reputation group decreased in oxyhemoglobin concentration compared to all other groups, and face ID and reputation group had a lower concentration when compared to control, but increased one in concentration when compared to reputation group. So here we basically had the same pattern in terms of control and face ID processing, but we did have more activation in terms of the face ID and reputation group than the reputation group. And the reason why we expected that to happen was because when you have two stimuli, so face ID and reputation group, the VMFC working as an interventional hub of all of the information will have to process reputation scores in terms of the face you are seeing. You have to somehow process those two types of information and make them make sense to integrate and make a decision. So, as I said, DLPFC was probably engaged in terms of risk-taking and expectation processing, had higher concentration in the absence of direct information of co-players' behavior. VMPFC supports the framework of value-based social decision-making by integrating contextual social cues, and had a higher activation during the process of integrating social information when compared to a single information processing. This reinforces the concept that varying levels of contextual information dynamically modulate processing in these brain regions. So as main findings, here we had that the identity and reputation interplay, that identity cues alone, like face photos, did not enhance cooperation, that the combination with reputation information significantly increased cooperation. In terms of the effect of identity attributes on cooperation, we found that raised significant influence on cooperative behavior, creating strong in-group, out-group dynamics. We did not consistently, age and gender did not consistently affect cooperation. And in terms of neurophysiological results, we found that the DLPFC had a main role on processing of expectation and risky-taking analysis. And VMPFC had a role in association of different social, processing of different social information. In terms of theoretical impacts, this still challenges dual process models of cooperation in the sense that offers explanations that goes beyond simply describing a topography of the behavior if people are cooperating or free-riding in cooperation decision-making. Supports a value-based framework by first, because cooperation is shaped by identity, labels, and reputation, and also by social norms, not simply by binary process. And also neurophysiological data indicate dynamic engagement of diverse neurocognitive pathways. Thank you.
Okay, so thank you very much, Waldir, for your presentation, and congratulations. And so now we are moving to the questioning phase. So we are going to start with Professor Waldir. And so, Waldir, you can decide the way you will pose your questions to Waldir. So thank you very much again. It's a great pleasure to have you here. We are all the time learning a lot from you. Thank you very much.
Good. So I'll maybe ask a couple of questions, then turn it over to Patricia and others. And if there's time at the end, I've got more, or we can talk after about the others. But I'll focus on two. But first, I just have to say, I don't know about Brazil, but in the US, when you tell somebody to talk for 30 minutes, they usually talk for 40 or 50. But you hit it like right on the button, like 29 minutes. I was timing you. That was amazing. And so I certainly appreciate that. I also appreciate the thesis. It was very clear and well written. I certainly learned a lot from it. I'm amazed by the variety of methods, meta-analyses as well as brain studies and behavioral, very good effect sizes and so on. There's lots to follow up on, and I look forward to that. Another feature that I really liked was kind of you admitting all the limitations. I mean, this stuff is extremely complicated, and you can't answer all the questions at once. So I like it when people do just what you did, which is admit, this one paradigm might not answer everything. With that in mind, I'm going to focus on two issues. One of them sounds philosophical, and I apologize for that. But I think it also affects something and might point to a future study or analysis of the data you've got, which could be useful. And here's my philosophical question. what is cooperation? Like, what do you mean by cooperation? Because at the start, you said, both in the thesis and in the presentation, that cooperation is often treated as the opposite of being selfish. But I just want to make sure we're on the same page here. Don't you agree? You can be selfish and cooperative at the same time.
So thank you for the question, and we could talk about that for 3 hours straight. So if you have that time at some point in the future, I would love to. Because yeah, in 5 years of studying that, one thing I learned is that the definition of cooperation is not pretty clear in the literature. It's definitely not really clear in the literature. One reason, one thing that we can use to show that is the variety of methods to study cooperation that are described in the review, systematic review chapter. So we had a table there. We had 6, 7 designs and experiments to methods used to test cooperation. And if you look closely to them, you will find out that a lot of them doesn't measure the same thing, but they all say they are measuring cooperation. Usually, in terms of cooperation, there's two factors that I like to use as a definition of what I will consider cooperation, in the sense that first, it's interdependent behavior between two or more people that is based on a rule. And then we go to the second factor that is the production of public goods. So that rule established between those people basically established that all the produced goods of that relation will be for the whole group, will be public goods. So it's an interdependent action in the sense that participants of that group can or cannot cooperate at certain times, but they will still be part of the group. They will still be part of the distribution of those public goods generated by those behaviors in that group. That being said, a lot of the time, this is not what we study. So because the methods are tricky, are complex, they have some specifics that makes very difficult to really study that concept of cooperation. But that's the reason why I like to use the public goods game. It's because they that game specifically have those two characteristics. So the participants are in a group where there is a clear rule that their behavior will impact everyone, will result in terms of public goods. But they also have the idea that their behavior is interdependent from the other participants. So if I do not cooperate, the group still exists, the other participants can cooperate still. So those two factors are present. But being honest with you, when I looked at the literature, there's some incredible variability of the definitions of cooperation and on the way people study. So for the sake of this study, what the definition I used, and the reason why I use the public goods game to measure cooperation, is this specific criteria. Yeah.
So somebody could, I take it, cooperate in your particular paradigm in the public good game. And the public good is what? More money in the general pot?
Yeah, and that is an abstraction. Yeah, but it is in the sense that that pool will be. So the definition of public goods is basically non-finity in the sense that it's not getting over by the behavior of anyone. So it will be distributed among everyone. So it's non-excludable. Nobody will be excluded from the distribution. And also they will receive their part their fair share of things. So yes, in terms of an abstraction for the paradigm is considered a public good. Yes.
But we're not studying their motivation, just whether they do or do not contribute. And what makes this a public good is it has this effect or doesn't. But we're not studying their motivation at all at that point, right? Because we
No.
don't know why they contributed, okay, good.
Yeah, in that sense, I would consider, yeah, in that sense, I would consider this more basic research and not, yeah.
Yeah. So let's turn to your table again, and I'll just pick one of them because there are a whole bunch in that chapter. But let's take the prisoner's dilemma is mentioned. There, I'm not sure what the public good is or whether these people really are interdependent and whether it fits this account.
Yeah, and that's the reason why I personally find hard to define a lot of studies that use prisoner's dilemma, because sometimes they are measuring some type of behavior that would not fall into that category. But I would say that in the prisoner's dilemma, you have a certain threshold that the participant will have the decision to cooperate with other person. And here's the tricky thing about the prisoner's dilemma is because usually we are talking about a dual perspective. So it's just two participants. So you are not talking about a group. So this is another discussion in the sense that if a group is necessary for cooperation or not, if you can cooperate in terms of two people. But the threshold is pretty similar to the public goods game, but it's adapted to two people, to a two people game. So I would say yes, it's kind of similar, although there is discussion about being a dual thing.
So here's my positive suggestion, and maybe you've already looked at this, but some of the results in that chapter were mixed. This is where you're reviewing the literature, so it's not surprising. And have you looked at maybe a subset of the tasks to see whether you get more consistent results for this group of tasks and other results for this other group of tasks? And you might get more consistent results if you group them in a way that brought out some of the differences among the tasks. Did you look at that?
Yeah, I didn't look at that, but that's an awesome idea. So the results of the review were divided in terms of the technique used to achieve to get neurophysiological data, but maybe a better way to do it, or an extra way to do it, is to separate those results in terms of the type of method they used for study cooperation. Absolutely, yes.
Yeah, that's what I'm suggesting. So I don't want to take up too much time, but I did want to get to a second question, which is also a large scale question. A large part of this thesis is about the debate between the dual process framework and the value-based framework. I wanted to get straight what the relationship is between those two. Because I'm going to pick on one little sentence at the end because it was exactly what I was thinking. You actually said that your results challenged the dual process framework by going beyond it. Now, challenging it is different from going beyond it because it might supplement it. I'm wondering, how could a dual process framework theorist respond? And could they simply say, look, you're right, all of these contextual factors and that you bring in and so on, that's all very important to determining which of the two processes dominates.
Yeah.
And so everything you've done is adding to my theory. It's not undermining it. Would that actually fit your results or not?
I think they could and they would say that, but I think maybe I have not explicitly enough in the discussion said why I think that challenges the dual view. Because in a certain way, this is almost a philosophical question too, or discussion, because it is what do we know if we do know that cooperation is precisely decided by, in some level, to an automatic or deliberative processing. Once we know that actually there, every time people are making decisions, there will be contextual factors that will be put in the equation to solve that decision. What does it mean to have that information in terms of automatic or deliberative processing? One thing that is important is I'm not saying that there will not be automatic or deliberative processing that are indirectly involved to cooperation, because people need to perceive their environment, to process a lot of stimuli, perceptual stimuli. So a lot of times dual processing can be happening in terms of others' cognitive functions. But in terms of cooperation, there is no evidence, absolutely no evidence, that cooperation can be determined by a dual process. And beyond the idea of not having no evidence for that, the studies that show that have not replicated, we do not have a pattern. But beyond that, the fact that we can explain cooperation in terms of contextual factors and the type of social information people have in making a decision makes absolutely unnecessary almost in terms of scientific progress to contribute to that type of framework or tool framework. Yes, but I agree with you. Maybe that idea of challenging these processes is not well described in the discussion.
Yeah, I want to sit down with you at some point and go through your results and try to look at each one and say, how would a dual process theorist think about this? Because they can say, well, photos, are not the kind of thing you can kind of calculate and put into words. And so they might trigger intuitions of some sort, whereas the reputation scores are going to trigger a more deliberative process because you've got numbers there and figures on your diagram. And it wasn't clear to me which of your results would undermine that kind of picture, that the reputation would trigger deliberative results and the photos would be more likely to trigger, and the control group would also trigger more intuitive processes because you don't have the numbers in front of you turning you into a more deliberative machine. Your results undermine that kind of story?
In terms that also, when you are discussing frameworks, it always has some level of personal intent. You can always interpret it in terms that you think are the best ones to do. My point is that we do not need that explanation for these results because we have a simpler explanation. It's the explanation of what types of information those stimuli give to the participant regarding the cooperation. Of course, in terms if I am a dual process theorist, I'm going to try to explain all of those processes in my own terms and in terms of automatic or deliberative. But I think the results showed we do not need that type of explanation here.
Good, that helps. So the argument is largely of the form, you don't need dual processes. You get a simpler explanation. It's not that your results are incompatible with the dual process picture.
In some sense, yeah, you could say that. Yeah, probably you could say that.
Okay, good. Well, I'll stop there. I do have lots of other questions and look forward to discussing them, but let Professor Lockwood take over.
Okay, thank you very much, Walter, for putting so many interesting questions and providing this discussion. Um, I think Waldir, I don't know, he has some personal questions with the dual model process. I don't know. And maybe Waldir, I think maybe because you're assuming that they will not reflecting on their model considering your data, you see. So maybe they would like to think their model coupled with your data and try to figure out a new model in a way that you can put them all together. It's like the world. We are living in a polarized world, so we need to put people with different perspectives together. So maybe because Walter he put it a good point. You can think your data also using the dual model, and you are not challenging it in this sense. So I think, yeah, I think there is a way to figure out how to put both together and see which is interesting from each one that might explain better your data. But yeah, just yeah, it's important. So thank you a lot, Water, again. Thank you very much. So now we're moving to questions from Professor Patricia Lockwood. Patricia, thank you very much. And before you start, I would like to apologize for yesterday. It was so embarrassing, that thing. Walter, I don't know if you hear about what happened yesterday. So some people with nothing to do just invade our Zoom meeting and start putting some pornography, and yeah. And then it was exactly the moment Patricia will start her talk. So yeah. So sorry, Patricia. Sorry. I'm very sorry for that.
Oh, that's no problem. I didn't actually see anything. I just heard stuff because I was looking at my
all right,
screen.
yeah.
So I
Good
wondered
for
what
you.
was going on. Yeah, no, I'm sorry that you had to manage that. Really don't feel embarrassed at all. It's yeah, I thought they kind of stopped people being able to do these things, but clearly
Yeah.
not. They can still get in.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So thank you very much. So
No
yeah.
problem. Great. So yeah, thank you so much, Walter. I thought your thesis was, as Walter's already said, incredible. You know, the breadth of methods was really impressive. I really liked how you acknowledged kind of strengths and limitations, how you had really good power in all of your studies, and you kind of they really hung well together. It seemed like, you know, it was clear the purpose of your thesis from the beginning, which is not always the case, where sometimes we have to back translate what we did for 5 years. So I thought that was really excellent. So I just have a few questions, maybe based on more kind of nitty-gritty details and things that you might think for future studies, or things that you think might have changed your findings. So I was very interested in whether you thought the effects that you see would still be there if you'd used a kind of more minimal group membership paradigm. So, you know, if you just randomly allocated people to be like green team, blue team, because obviously when there's things like race or gender, people have these established groups that come with all of these other representations associated with them. So I wondered kind of why you chose that design, and whether you think it might be different if you'd used a minimal group paradigm.
Yeah, so when we were discussing what would be second study, because second study basically have this role of trying to help to answer the first study results. So we discussed that possibility, but even if we use that paradigm, it would be tricky in the sense that we would still to control for variables in terms of base photos, because even if we divided the whole thing in terms of colors or any minimal thing, you would still have to have base photos, and those base photos would transmit some level of information, and then we would have to have super strict control over that. So at that time, we decided to just do study two in the sense of really using and controlling those physical traits. But yeah, I think that could help us have a better answer in theory in the future. So as a future study, I think that could be very telling in a way. But yeah, it was just something we discussed. But then in the decision of what to do, we opted to have a more explicit, like just control the race variables, the sex variables, and see what happens. But yeah, I think the minimal group can be a paradigm to use in future.
Yeah, and do you think, I guess you found that only really race affected things, so do you think maybe you wouldn't see it in a minimal group paradigm? Like, do you think it's quite a high level that it operates at?
That result is kind of tricky to interpret and to really know what happened there. Of course, we have all of the racial bias and all of that other research you have to explain, and that's good. But also in terms of the level of the pattern of significancy of that group, the way that behavior was constrained to that specific relation of white player participants with their in-group co-players. We still, I haven't think exactly about that level of result actually.
Yeah, no, that's great. And then, so my next question is a bit like one of the ones Walter asked, maybe thinking more about people's motivations for, donating in the public goods game or not. So I was wondering if you took measures or thought about how much people kind of identified with their group. So, when you're modulating things like race or gender or age, is that dependent on how much people feel like an old person or how much they feel like their identity is as a white person? And do you think that could affect the sense of group membership and therefore why people might be more likely to donate to the group? Because they basically feel like in a selfish framework, it's almost like donating to myself because everyone is like me compared to like not like me.
Yeah, I think that is a good explanatory hypothesis for the results. But what happened was we tried to at first to include a measure of belonging to that group because, as you said, you can have a 60-year-old that doesn't feel belonging to that group at all. That might influence the results, and that might influence the results. But the tricky part is we were discussing, okay, so we put that in the beginning of the game, or we put that in the end. If we put that in the beginning, that will give the participant the perception that that is the thing that is being tested, which we're not really secretive about it, but also it can lead to some kind of influence the behavior, etc. And if you put that in the end, will the behavior in the PGG, in the interactions in the PGG, altered their perception of belonging to that group? So we decided that it would not be a useful measure in this method, but I probably would be in a new one if you can add some nuance to or to have a design that allow us to put that type of questioning in the experiment. So in this case, we just use self-declaration. So the person would tell us their ages and race and gender, and we would work.
Yeah, okay, that's great. That makes a lot of sense. And then moving on to the chapters where you looked more at the kind of neural basis of these effects. So you specifically talk about the DLPFC and VMPFC, but I guess as we discussed yesterday as well, these are quite large functionally characterized areas rather than anatomically characterized. Do you think there's evidence for like distinct subregions? And, when you were looking and reviewing the literature, I know there's work by like Joe Cutler showing that there are different parts of VMPFC involved in like strategic and non-strategic cooperation and things like that. So is that something that you can comment on?
Yeah, so that is absolutely important when looking to this area, specifically VMPFC, because in terms of neuroanatomical sketches, we know that there are parts that are social decision making or to emotional processing and things like that. But we have a limitation of the technique we used. So news data is not, it does not, we don't have a voxel analysis or anything like that. We have a more, unrestrained area. So that's the reason why we didn't look specifically to some areas of those areas. But yeah, that's a limitation specifically of the study we did because of the technique used. Yes.
And do you think you could have distinguished between like VMPFC and DMPFC, for example? Because I guess you went for like VMPFC and then the lateral area, but is there any distinction between the ventral and the dorsal that you could get at?
Yeah, so this was also a very low discussion we had because FNUs have this problem. Once you have the probe, you will have some probably some not very specific to very small areas specifically. What I would say is that regarding VMPFC, I think we can consider that we did not have very we're just finished. We did not have very interference. I know that's not the word, but of the DMPFC data on that specifically because of the location of toads. But the VMPFC was the most concerning on that regard because at some point we had to discuss, okay, is this area we are talking about specifically VMPFC or we are talking about a more orbital frontal area in general, things like that. But I think, as we can see in the image, I forget the number, I think figure 12, we have more ventral areas of that. So I would say we did pretty good in terms of location specifically. To this, but yeah, FNUs can have that problem in terms of specificity, spatial specificity.
Mm-hmm. That's great. Thank you. I think that's all of my questions.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Professor Patricia. It's a pleasure to have you here on this board, and thank you very much. So now we are moving to our national members. So we are going to start with Professor Jessica.
Hello everyone. Yes, thank you all for inviting me to be a member of the board committee for European Disease Defense. I'm very happy to be part of the trajectory, even if it's like tiny final part of your PhD trajectory, but it's very nice. Also like to say hi to Professor Waldir and Patricia. It's very nice to meet you. And it's like kind of difficult for me to make interesting comments now after them, but I'll try my best today. And also hi to Gabriel, which is my roomie. And we are not like very close now, but yes, we see every day each other, so it's fine. So yes, I'm almost a lay reader because I don't have like neuroscience background. So I'll focus more on the systematic review chapter, which is I can like contribute more. And it's like, it's the only chapter that you skipped in your presentation. Yes, and just ask you why you skipped it. And also I'd like to hear how was like your experience in doing the systematic review, or did you find it more difficult?
Yeah. So in order to impress Walter with the time of the presentation, I had to make some choices. So the reason why I didn't put it, I skipped it, and I was yesterday thinking about it, if I should have or not, was choosing what should be in the presentation. I think the review chapter would, it is in the presentation in the sense that theoretical part about the neurophysiological areas data are based mainly on that article. But yes, I didn't present just because thinking of the presentation itself. Maybe I should have. The second question, sorry.
How was yes experiencing?
It's a lot of work. That's the main thing. Review articles tend to be impressive amount of work. But it was great in the sense that once you do and the things there, you have a more clearer painting of the whole thing of the thing that you were maybe reading several articles through 5 years, but then you have a picture that is there. So it's a lot of work, but it's also very rigorous.
No, yes, no, I'm just asking because I found it very interesting and it was a very nice research question for a systematic review. And as it is very interesting, I think that is going to be a huge contribution to the field. I think there are some like methodological aspects of the systematic review that we can talk later, not now, because I don't think that makes sense to do it now. But I have some suggestions to make it more like to increase the transparency and also the I don't know how to say this in English, so reprodutibilidade of your systematic review, okay. Because I mean the difference between a systematic and a non-systematic review is the systematization. So you should like do several steps that are you can follow some guidelines. I saw that you use like the PISMA protocol. So you said your flow chart, but I missed some like parts and especially in how you report your methodology. Then I mean if you are interested in publish this systematic review, and I think you should because it's very, very nice. I think you can do some adjustments and I can help with that in the future, yes. And I can send you the comments too.
Thank you.
And now my second set of questions is more because I'm curious about your PhD thesis. I learned a lot by reading. It was very easy to follow, even for me that I didn't know much about like operative behavior and also like neurophysiology. It was very, very good to read. It's very pleasant reading. And I'll take advantage that you are almost a PhD in this field to make some questions that I'm curious about. For example, yes, so coming back to the high level determinants, as Professor Patricia mentioned, I read a paper that was discussing like the responses to restrictive pandemic measures, why they vary across countries. And one discussion that they mentioned is that the social norms that are different between some countries. So there are countries that are like collectivist countries, you know, that prioritize collective well-being and social harmony over individual like achievements or independence or autonomy. And it's like it's a set of countries that are collectivist and a set of countries that are more individualistic view of social norms, you know. And I'm thinking about that you mentioned several individual differences that may difference like the individuals and how they present their cooperative behavior. And how do you think that these like more social norms or more high level factors could like also influence your cooperative behavior?
Yeah, so one thing that we used is that we had a measure of generosity on the studies. We had a dictator game round in all of the studies. This is usually used as a measure of generosity in or prosociality in general in some studies. A dictator game, that's basically I have $100. I should give you. I should, but I can give you some amount. What amount I need to get? That's basically the thing. So we use that to predict if individuals with a different level of prosociality or generosity would cooperate in a different way in those groups. So we understood that maybe we would have some level of background in terms of prosociality or in terms of generosity that would help to explain cooperation. We did not find any strong evidence for that. But again, we should probably we should have a lot of more things that could be as determined for participants' behavior on PUG besides their contact with the social information that we were given. So maybe it was not about social information; it was about level of prosociality or level or things about personality traits or things like that. That could be sort of upper level explanations to that behavior. But again, at some sense, I understand that as a limitation, but also I think my goal was to understand in terms of experimentally the economic games and things like that, how that behavior occurs in that setting. Mainly because I think there's a methodological impact on the fact that sometimes a lot of the results, a lot of the studies on the area are based on just putting people in front of a computer and answer to economic games.
Mhm.
So I wanted to have a more similar setting, experimental design, etc., to other studies, so it can be more general. That word that I just don't know. Say to generalização of
Yes.
studies. Generalization, yes, thank you. So that's the reason why we didn't have one ton of measurements to, to try to explain more upper levels cooperation, but maybe for the future studies, we should.
Yeah, sure. I don't think that is a limitation. It was just something that we have to keep in mind when we think, when we have like we run experiments and then we have our results from our PhD, and then we want this to translate into public policies to be good for everyone. But sometimes it's not, I don't know, it's not like a direct translation. There are several steps to make it real for people. So just something that we have to keep in mind, the difficulty of making our tiny results, how they can be bigger. And yeah, I always wrote something related to personality. That it was my second question. How do you think that individuals' personalities could contribute? Because I think that there are some individuals that are more prone to collaborate or to cooperate just because of their personality, and even if they know like the reputation, or if they know other things, they are prone to collaboration. Maybe this is related to the early life experiences, maybe, I don't know, because I also study like child and adolescents, and I'm always think that some experience that we experience during our childhood may be very important to how we behave in the future. And I don't know if
No, it makes sense. So we know that children usually cooperates unstrained, so they cooperate with everyone all the time. But at some point in development, they stop doing it. So we start to have a variability that was not very pronounced when they were children. So at some point, in terms of development of personality or person itself, you have the addition of this factor of this personality traits and things like that that probably would help to explain those results for sure. Yeah.
Yes. Okay, and now my final question is also related to all of this that we are discussing about. And you mentioned in your discussion that maybe the cooperative behavior is also like I don't know, influenced by socioeconomic status. And when we say about sex, race, and age, we are talking about like socioeconomic status as well, because like I don't know, variables that are very related, that tie to each other. And so I don't know, something that I came to my mind is that depending on how much resources you have, you may be like willing to cooperate or not, because I don't know, maybe if you don't have much resources, maybe you don't want to cooperate because I don't know, you may feel that you won't have it. I know that is you study cooperation with public goods, so maybe this would return, of course, but I don't know. If you lack resources and for your survival, maybe you don't really want to cooperate, especially if you don't know other person, because maybe it's going to, I don't know, miss for you in the future. I don't know. It's just something that, what do you think about?
Yeah, no, I have thought about that for a long time, because we know that when making economic decisions, and most of economic games, obviously, the economic environment the person is in, it's obviously something that can modulate their response. In the first study, we had an analysis trying to control for economic background, if economic level, if that would interfere. I don't remember specifically now, but we did find something that was, if I'm not mistaken, about middle class behavior that was different from upper class and lower classes. And then this is the tricky part about cognitive and neural behavior data, social data, because sometimes you have to discuss in terms of other areas, sociology and things like that. And we know that some economic classes have characteristics that can influence their behavior in general. Like we know there's a discussion about the way the middle class is kind of between the idea that you cannot grow, but you cannot also, you have to work all the time to not be down. And that creates a sense of almost desperation in terms of economic decisions that can influence that type of behavior. So yes, I think that variable is very important. Although it's also very hard to control, because usually as participants, as researchers, we do not find a lot of upper classes people to do research on, or people who are in most lower classes that don't have access sometimes to what we use to recruit participants and things like that. So it's hard to do, but it's certainly a thing that it is important in this context. Yes.
No, it's fine. It's just like for discussion. I mean, your work is very nice. Again, I really enjoyed reading. I learned a lot. Congratulations, and thank you for inviting me to be part of your milestone again. And let me know if I can cooperate with you in the future.
Of course. Of course. Yeah, I will appreciate your help with the review.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Jessica, for joining us in the board and all these questions and suggestions about the meta-analysis, and this. That's great. That's awesome. So now we are moving to our last member of the committee, my friend Gabriel. Hey, Gabriel, are you feeling good? Gabriel is not here because he's I think, do you have what, a flu? What do you have?
I don't know. I'm woke today a little bit with throat pain, and
Okay.
I'm better now. But it's good to avoid to expose you to this sickness, you know. But
Oh
I
yeah,
think
he's there. Yeah.
okay.
So thank you, Gabriel. Okay,
Thank
start.
you. Okay, thank you, Paulo. Thank you, Waldir, for inviting me to your doctoral defense. First of all, congratulations. I think you've done a great job, you know, and your manuscript shows all the effort you've done in the doctoral degree, you know. So congratulations. And but we are here to help you to get deeper, no? Not only to say good stuff. And I'm starting with what Valtinho said. I believe it's one main question in your work, you know, because the main line of your thesis is to show that you have like these two theoretical frameworks that it seems to be, how to say, contrary to each other and positives, okay? And you're saying that your work will help to say that, okay, the value-based decision is better and we should not use this dual processing more, you know? But I don't think this is the case, you know, because I don't think that the idea people use to say that they are opposed, I don't trust this idea also. You know, I think that you are right when you say that using dual process framework to explain brain processing is not good at all, you know. It's not like you have two systems competing. I agree with that. But it's not the case that it's not dual process is not collaborating or giving some ideas, because it's I believe very well based, you know, in the literature that dual process works, explains a lot. And you say that when you use value-based decision, you are like let's say comproving, certain that your data is like okay, I use that data that shows that the context influences And if you say that context influences, value-based decision is the right one. But, for example, David Rand, in that paper in 2016, he said specifically that context and the individual difference, they are important to the decision. And he is saying that using dual process theory. So how to explain that your data, again, as Walter asked you, how to explain that your data could be, for example, explained by dual process theory? I agree with what you in this case. How to explain that?
So first, I think it's good to organize my rationale in this sense. So first, as I demonstrate in the first chapter, even in the studies that shown that cooperation can have a pattern between automatic and deliberative process, those studies did not replicate. Not only they did not replicate, that we have a lot of results that are opposite to each other. So you have studies on dual framework on cooperation that show that those processes are regarding automatic process would be more cooperative and deliberative would be more provider. Well, and studies showing the opposite of that. So we don't have a pattern on that studies. Second, we did have many labs, really large study. We didn't find any evidence of that thing working. That's the second point. The third point, in the second chapter, the first study, we test for variations in terms of RT's responses. Yes, that's not the optimal way to study dual processes, but if you do have, for example, in the control group, more automatic or more deliberative process, we would expect to have differences in terms of RT and specific responses of cooperation decision. We didn't. We did not find that. So this is the first argument. We do not have any hard evidence that a response on cooperation or free riding is directly linked to an automatic or a deliberative process. That's the first. The second argument is once context matters, and I think we all agree it does, dual process can be correlated in some processing of perceptual that is well established. There are areas that have shown some specific strong evidence that dual process work. I'm not at all saying that all the cognitive process that involves decision making does not involve dual process. I would be dumb if I was saying that. I'm not saying that. What I defend in the thesis is that for analyzing cooperation specifically, those processes are not needed. That framework is not needed. Of course, I can be wrong in that sense, but I don't, at this point, the evidences we have, I do not believe we need that type of explanation here. Again, you probably have cognitive functions related to decision-making in general that are obviously controlled by dual processes. But in terms of cooperation itself, I don't see any evidence of that.
I don't know. Yeah, I think that paper. yeah. I think that would be good to you maybe getting deeper into this theoretical discussion, because I believe it's more interesting to have the idea of okay, maybe these two frameworks interact some way, and maybe this is, I believe, the most important thing, more than okay, let's use value-based decision, because value-based decision, you said in your manuscript that is it new or is it an old model? What do you think? Value-based decision.
In terms of historically development, it's not exactly old, but I wouldn't call it exactly new either. Yeah.
Gabi, can I just add something
Sure, sure.
Okay, because I think while Waldir was answering you, I think he said something that I think probably this is one of the things that is making Waldir decide that it's time to put the dual model out of the and I'm not sure it's right. Because let me ask you something, Waldir, why, for example, why deliberative processing should all the time result in free rider decisions? Because that's your argument. You're saying that the literature sometimes are showing opposite effects based on this assumption that deliberative processing will result in free rider decisions. I'm not sure about this assumption, you know? People has a lot of individual variability. We are, for sure, we have our evolutionary history, but also our cultural and social and everything. So I'm not sure all the time deliberation will result in rational decisions. That is all the time people are saying, but I'm not so sure. And also the opposite. I'm not so sure that all the time automatic processing will result in cooperation. And considering that these assumptions are not right, then saying the results are contradictory is not possible anymore. So what do you think?
No, I think specifically, of course, if I'm saying that the discussion about being automatic or deliberative shouldn't be the main discussion we make when we are studying cooperation, of course, if we are processing contextual information, we are talking about basically deliberative processing. That will lead, of course, to different decisions. But again, I fail to understand the need of discussing these in terms of dual processing. Yeah.
Okay, Gabi? Sorry for interrupting.
Yeah, no. So because that paper of David Rand, I like it a lot, and he said something that Valtinho asked you in the beginning that maybe you can have a good model that predicts what is expected based, for example, he compares pure cooperation with strategic cooperation. And I believe it's a good model. He said about the model, he calls it the social heuristics hypothesis. Do you know that?
Yeah. Sure.
And I think it's very interesting because I believe the value-based model, it's not new, it's good. And the way it explains how the brain processes information, I believe it's better than this dual framework, But I believe theoretically, it doesn't help more than the dual process models, not explain this brain processing. Okay, this I agree with you. Value based is better, and I will have the prefrontal ventral medial. Okay, it integrates a lot of information, and it's fine. But I believe saying that a value-based decision, I believe it's not so good at predicting, this you say, okay, you have context, you have more information, it will change the way you take decision to cooperate. But in what way, I believe that model of David Rand, maybe it explains more than what explained with your data, He said, okay, if you have a strategic cooperation or a pure cooperation, it will change the way you decide to cooperate or no using deliberative or automatic processing. It depends what you expect, depends what you are used to, I believe it could be, you could think better in this theoretical framework in your manuscript, maybe to get deeper in this question, I believe it lacks this deepness. It's too hassle, too
Shell.
shallow. Okay, thank you. And for example, the theoretical framework in your manuscript, it lacks a lot of reference and citation. You are started discussing this, but I think it lacks reference and this theoretical discussion more, based, more integrated with the literature. Okay, I think it would be good to see that better. So maybe Valtinho, after my argument, he will ask something that way again. But before that, I have other questions. I have some suggestions for your papers for the chapter 3 and 4, and I will send it to you
Yeah.
separately, okay?
Thank you.
But I have some questions regarding your neurocorrelates paper showing ventromedial and dorsolateral, okay?
Yeah.
First, I'm not sure that you are aiming the ventromedial with your montage. What do you think about that?
Yeah, so that was the discussion we were having earlier, in the sense that in the montage of the knee, sometimes you have this problem of getting more ventral parts specifically. But I think that we do have information from the ventral medial. Of course, we do not have more deeper areas because that's not possible in years. And that's the reason why we have the limitation regarding that we have some areas of the ventral medial that are responsible for different things. We do not have that information here, but I think we are getting a good part of it. Yes.
I believe it would be good to cite someone who used a similar montage and said, okay, we are getting near or into the ventromedial, because you just present there the montage, but it's not clear what kind of specific that points in the chain system, what you're using to aim the ventromedial or dorsolateral. And I
Sure.
think it would be good at least to to say that as a limitation, you know. And another question, I believe, because you were criticizing that dual process theory based on the lack of replication, but in your study using the neurocorrelation, the FNIRS, you found a different result from your first paper regarding the use of face and reputation, how they interact. But you do not discuss this. You only discuss the neural correlates and blah, 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 etc. But I believe it lacks the discussion of the behavioral findings. And I believe it's one of the most interest results in your paper, you know? What do you think about that?
What happened was the behavior data on the neural paper. The problem is when we collected the first study, we had like 800 people. We controlled for economic, we controlled for gender, we controlled for a lot of things. So it was a very representative sample, and a sample that made sense in that context. But here we have, the general type of sample that neurophysiological studies have. Psychology undergrads and with very little diversity in the sample, with a much smaller sample per group. So what happened was I didn't consider this a replication study of the first one, because we simply did not control for sample and things like that. So yeah, maybe you're right, I should have discussed this results, but or if I didn't, I should have said why I didn't. But yeah, that's the reason, because these results, yeah, they are different from the first one, but I don't know if you can consider that a replication of the first one.
So you're saying that the socioeconomic stats, for example, is important to the way it influences the cooperation behavior.
I'm saying the variability of the sample is important for, yeah.
So it's the way you use faces. It's not like you will have different findings depending of the. It's not something stable.
I'm not saying they are depending on that, but I'm saying they might be depending on that. Yes.
Okay. All right. Let me see something more. I believe that's the main questions, and the other stuff I send you, and we can discuss separately. What's more structural and details, okay?
Thank
But
you.
I believe this idea of the theoretical base of your work and the way you express this, like you are testing, assessing if you should use value-based and not use the dual frame. I believe it's not a good way to express this idea, no? Maybe I believe you should go deeper and maybe think about how you could integrate, or how could your data explain this lack of constance of your results, you know?
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay. Thank you very much, Gabriel. Thank you a lot.
Thank you, Paulo.
So now I'm going to send you the link for our meeting with the committee to deliberate. So I'm sending a message right now. So we can just okay, it's okay. We can just close our screen and the microphone, because after we need to come back here to give the final results to Waldir, saying if he's a new doctor or not. So
So you're going to send the link by email or by?
yeah, I just sent an email. I just sent an email. Yeah.
Oh, I got it. Yeah, I got it. Good.
Oh, okay. So after a long deliberation, we discussed a lot now. So the committee decided by unanimity that you are approved. So now you are Dr. Waldir Sampaio. So, for sure, it was not supposed to me to make questions, for sure. Yeah, I'm your advisor, and I'm not going to make any question at all. So yeah. So, but I just would like to say some few words about Waldir. Waldir is a guy that he arrived here in the lab. Usually in my lab, many of the students here, they start working with me from the undergrad. And Waldir arrived here not from the undergrad. He arrived here directly to do his PhD. And I didn't know Waldir before, but he impressed me at the first meeting by his level of knowledge and professionalism, and the way that he put the questions, the right questions, and the way you see today, the way he defend his ideas and his thoughts, and that is super important in someone that are looking for a scientific career. But then when Waldir started working here, I realized that it was much more than just technical skills and this position of thinking. He was a great guy, collaborating with everybody here in the lab, working in a nice way. And I need to say that he helped me a lot to kind of, because I did some studies in the past on cooperation, but we were not doing that anymore. And he was responsible to open this again in the lab. So I'm so thankful for you to come here to decide to come here to this lab, and I'm really proud of you, and I'm really looking forward to see your next steps. Yeah, you're going to shine a lot. So thank you, congratulations, Waldir.
Thank you. Thank you, Paul. I would like to thank you, Professor Lockwood, Professors Armstrong, Professor Gabriel, Professor Jessica. Really, no, I mean, having you all reading something I wrote and something I worked with, it's truly, it's going to be the honor, one of the honors of my life, really. Thank you for that, and thank you, Paulo. It's you know, all.
Okay, I know.
Yeah.
Okay.
I wish I were there to celebrate with you.
I need to say, Waldir, that Walters knows how to celebrate.
I'm expecting.
I have a great time there. I cannot wait to go again, Mr. Walter. It was so great, yeah.
And you're
I'm
welcome
expecting-
anytime.
Thank you. So thank you again, Patricia, Walter, Gabrielle, and Jessica, and congratulations, Waldir.
Thank you.
Let's celebrate. Thank you.
Congratulations.
Congratulations.
Congratulations, Waldir.
Thank you.
I hope you have lots of celebrations planned now and a big sense of relaxation.
Yeah. I didn't have the time to plan anything, but
Yeah.
I will work on that.
Sounds lovely.
Thank you.
Okay. Hey, Carolyn, how are you doing?
Good, how are you?
Thank you very much for accepting to present your work in this new meeting.
Oh, thanks so
That's
much for
great.
inviting me. I'm excited to be part of this again. It was so much fun and so stimulating last year.
Yeah. So we are just starting everything, so we are almost ready to start, okay?
Oh, sounds good.
Yeah. Você vem para aqui para aparecer. Okay, good afternoon, everybody. So we are in our second day of the Rethinking the Future 2, and we are now we are receiving Professor Carolyn Parkinson to present his work. So Carolyn's research explores how the human brain represents, navigates, and shapes social environments by integrating social psychology with computational methods. She focuses on understanding the mental processes involved in encoding social network structures and the cognitive and behavioral effects of these structures. Her research combines real-world social relationship data with brain activity analysis to explore interactions between social networks and cognition. Additionally, she studies the neuromechanisms that help us mentally traverse diverse types of psychological distance, such as spatial, temporal, and social distance. Her work investigates how this distance influences our response and how emotions and motivation can alter our perceptions. In the computational social neuroscience lab, Professor Carolyn Parkinson used cognitive neuroscience, social network analysis, machine learning, and social psychology to deepen our understanding of how we perceive and navigate our social world. So thank you very much, Carolyn, for joining us. Carolyn was, in the first Rethinking the Future here in presence. This time we were doing everything virtually. But again, Carolyn, it's a great pleasure to have you here. And so thank you very much.
Well, thank you so much for that really generous introduction. And thanks to Paulo and Anna and everyone at Mackenzie, especially for organizing this meeting and this initiative. It's really a privilege to get to join you guys again and just be part of this community, because it's just such a positive community full of like so much creative energy and ideas. And I think it's a really unique and special thing. So thank you for involving me again. I'm really happy to be here virtually this year. And so just to preface what I'll present in my talk, in my lab, as Paulo said, our research is generally focused on the interaction between our cognition as individuals and the social networks in which each of us exists. And today I'm going to tell you about two new studies that we've been working on that fall under this general theme. The first set of work that I'll tell you about focuses on how we think about social networks. And specifically, it asks if people's knowledge about how social networks tend to be structured shapes how they treat new people when they meet them, and how they expect those new people to behave based on what they know about what their friends are like. And also if knowledge of what people are like influences our memories and our beliefs about who is friends with whom. And then the second line of work that I'll tell you about asks if we can predict things about how close you'll get to other people in the future based on brain data that we collect on you and on those other people before you have a chance to meet one another. And so, as you know, friendships are just incredibly important to us as humans, and not just our own friendships. We spend a huge amount of time just speaking and thinking about other people's friendships, and we often seem compelled to do this and to find it fun, right? We engage in gossip about other people's relationships quite frequently, for better or worse. And a lot of the content of our daily conversations and thoughts are about other people and their relationships with each other. And one of the first things that we often do when we meet a new person is try and situate them in our mental map of who knows whom and who's friends with whom. And so we've previously found that when you just see the face of somebody who you know, your brain retrieves all this knowledge of where that person sits in your mental map of friendships, presumably so that this knowledge can beneficially shape how you're going to think and how you're going to act. But we still don't know very much about how this happens. And so in the first set of studies that I'll tell you about today, as I just alluded to, we wanted to ask how our knowledge about other people's friendships shapes how we behave towards those people and how we expect those people to behave towards us. And also if what we learn about other people as individuals impacts our beliefs about their friendships with others. And we thought that one sensible place to start with this could be testing if people use homophily as a sort of social prior that shapes how we expect other people to behave and to be tied to one another. So if you're not familiar with this term, homophily is essentially just another word for assortativity in friendships. So the tendency for people who are already similar to each other to become friends. And homophily has been really widely observed across diverse contexts and in terms of a variety of traits. And if homophily really does serve as a sort of social prior, then people should expect that birds of a feather will flock together, as the old saying goes. So the similarity of people's behavior should shape our beliefs about their friendships. And the flip side of the coin would be that people should expect that those who flock together will be of the same feather. So in other words, people should expect that others are going to act similar to how their friends act. And so to look at this, we had people come into the lab for a study where they thought that we were interested in if testing if factors like how much reward is at stake would impact their enjoyment of some games that we were going to have them play. And we told them that we were just going to have them play some simple games with others on a social gaming website that was being developed and tested at a few different university campuses. And so we first took their picture and made a little profile for them on the website and told them that the people who they would be playing with were members of this website who regularly log in to play games with each other for fun and to win prizes like money. And that the website had a social component as well. So these people have ostensibly gotten to know each other and befriend one another beforehand. And we also told them that each player's top 3 friends on the site would be shown with their profile photo. So if you're the right combination of old enough and young enough to remember things like the MySpace top 8 or early days of Facebook where you could choose the friends who would be shown on your page, this was meant to be sort of like that. But we said that due to most users' privacy settings on the site, you'd only get to see these people if you had already interacted with them before. When you hadn't interacted with somebody's friends before, you would just see these question marks like what's shown on this slide. And the participants luckily believed all this, which allowed us to manipulate their beliefs about friendships in this community. So this is the kind of thing that people saw when playing games with somebody on this website. So say you're a participant, first we need to determine what kind of games you would be playing. Our participants were all assigned to play what we called investment games, which are just trust games, and they were all assigned the role of player 1. And for those of you who are not familiar with what they entailed, I'll just quickly go through what a typical trust game looks like here. So say you're the participant, you're given $5 and you can choose how much of that to give to your partner, Paulo here. So any amount you give to him will be tripled. So say you give him $3, he'll get 9, and then he can decide how much to give back to you. And so if he is trustworthy, he might give you about half of that $9 back. And so everybody wins in a scenario like that, right? So Paulo gets $4.50 when he started off with nothing. You get $4.50, which is a very nice return on your initial $3 investment. So of course, if someone is trustworthy like Paulo, it makes sense to invest all that you can in them. But of course, not everyone is trustworthy like Paulo. You may encounter somebody else, maybe like me, who might be a little bit sketchier and less trustworthy. So I might take your $3 and give you nothing or very little back. And so if I give you nothing back and keep the $9 for myself, I make a nice profit, but you're left with nothing. And so in this game, just like in life, it's really in your interest to figure out who you can trust and who you can't trust, and then act accordingly. And so looking at how much people invest in their partners gives us a window into how much they trust each of those partners. So in block 1 of our study, after participants had joined the community, they played a bunch of trust games with these partners that they met. Some of these partners were trustworthy, meaning they returned about half the money. Some were untrustworthy, so they returned very little. And participants easily learned over time who was and wasn't trustworthy, as you can see here. So people are investing more over time in trustworthy partners and less in untrustworthy ones, as you would expect if they're learning the behavioral tendencies of these people. But it's really the next part of the study that we're more interested in. So now that our participants have joined this community and they have a sense of how some of its members tend to act, what happens when they meet these people's friends? So how are they going to expect these new people to behave? So in block 2, participants played with new partners. And for some of these people, participants would be able to see who their friends were because they'd met them earlier on in the study. And this is an overview of their partners. So some of their block 2 partners were trustworthy, some were not. Some had trustworthy friends, some had untrustworthy friends, and some just had no known friends. And these partners also varied in the consistency of their behavior, but just in the interest of time, here I'm just going to hone in on the really predictable partners. And so in this next part of the study, you'll meet a new person, like say Anna, and you can see that she's friends with me, who you met earlier. And so first we wanted to see if this knowledge about relationships between others would shape expectations about how a new person will behave. And if so, when you first meet Anna, you might expect her to be untrustworthy, since she's friends with me, who you learned was untrustworthy in block 1 of the study, compared to if you knew she was friends with Paulo, who you learned was trustworthy in block 1 of the study, or if you just knew nothing about who her friends were at all. And sure enough, that's what we find. So here the y-axis shows how much people invested on their very first trial with a new partner. And the x-axis shows the knowledge they had about those partners' friends. And you can see that people invested less when first interacting with new partners if those people had untrustworthy friends. And this persists, albeit to a subtler extent, even after participants have had the chance to learn what these people were like themselves through direct interactions, but just for trustworthy partners. When someone is untrustworthy, it doesn't seem to matter what their friends are like, you just don't really want to invest in them. And so we next wanted to see if these effects would extend to another context. And so next we had people rate their partners according to how much they'd like to play them again in a cooperative puzzle-solving game in the future. And so we wanted to see if these ratings would also be shaped by friendship knowledge, even though participants are making decisions about a totally new context, and even though they've already had repeated interactions with these people. So they already have a fair amount of direct experience with these people that they could just go on. And so here, preference ratings regarding how much they want to play with a given partner in this new cooperative puzzle-solving game are on the y-axis. And the orange bars are trustworthy partners. Yellow means untrustworthy. And the x-axis groupings show what was known about the partner's friends. And you can see again that for trustworthy partners in orange, even though these players are all behaving identically, participants prefer them less if they have untrustworthy friends, even in the face of countervailing information from their own behavior. So even though these people have consistently shown you again and again that they're really trustworthy. And so this all supports the idea that we assume that those who flock together are of the same feather, so that friends will behave similarly. But what about the other side of the coin that I mentioned earlier? So do people assume that birds of a feather are going to flock together, as the saying more commonly goes? And so to test this, we gave people an incidental memory test at the end of the study, where they would just see a series of matrices like what you're seeing here on this slide, where the rows and columns are their partners from the study. And they just go through the pairs and indicate if they think that that pair had been shown to be friends or not earlier in the study. And what we're really interested in here was the errors that people would make, and specifically if they'd be more likely to misremember pairs of people who had behaved similarly as having been friends. And so on the y-axis here, we have the false positive rate, so how often people remembered friendships that didn't really exist. The bar color shows whether the misremembered relationship is between two players who had behaved similarly or not. And the panels correspond to if they had both behaved consistently or if one or both of the partners was more variable in their behavior. And in general, people were more likely to mistakenly remember two people as having been friends if they had behaved similarly. And this was particularly true in cases where both partners had behaved really consistently. So you can see that in the panel on the far left here. And so together, these results support the idea that we expect friends to be similar to each other. And then this leads our knowledge about how others tend to behave to shape our beliefs about their relationships with each other and vice versa. But you might be thinking if people really assumed homophily, they should expect similar others who are not yet friends to become friends in the future. Because otherwise it could be that people are just assuming that those who are already friends might have grown similar to each other over time because of having influenced each other or having had shared experiences or having been exposed to common environments during their time as friends and so on. And so in some follow-up studies, participants again played trust games, but this time without any information about other players' ostensible friends and without telling them that this website had this social component where people could have already befriended one another. And then after playing these trust games for a while with these partners, participants predicted who would likely become friends with each other were they to meet in the future. And so here the y-axis will show you how often people predicted that others would befriend each other in the future, and the x-axis will show the composition of each dyad. And if people expected homophily to drive others' relationships, we'd expect them to more frequently predict that those who already had shown themselves to be similar would later become friends. And that's exactly what we find across two studies, as you can see here, where the blue and red bars are higher than the purple ones. But what about when it comes to predicting our own friendships? So what I didn't mention before is that we also had participants predict who they would be most likely to befriend in the future. And we had them play both roles in the trust game this time so that they could both learn about other people's trustworthiness and show us how trustworthy they were themselves. And so this time, the y-axis will show you how often participants predicted that they would become friends with a given partner in the future. And the left half of the plot will correspond to the untrustworthy participants, and the right half will correspond to trustworthy participants. And as before, the colors will show the composition of each dyad. And if people's expectations about their own friendships were also shaped by expectations of homophily, we'd expect a pattern like what looks like what you see here in this hypothetical data that I'm showing on this slide. But across two studies, we actually see something quite different, where people are consistently predicting that they'll become friends with trustworthy others, regardless of how those people had behaved themselves. And maybe you're wondering if people maybe just see themselves through rose-colored glasses or something, and so they might consider themselves to be trustworthy, even when their own behavior suggests otherwise, so even if they acted in an untrustworthy way. And if this were true, it could be the case that assumptions of homophily were still guiding the predictions of the people outlined in yellow here, who had behaved in an untrustworthy way, but still predicted that they'd become friends with trustworthy people in the future. And so in other words, maybe these people still thought of themselves as trustworthy, which would cause their predictions for their own and others' friendships to look different, even when they're being guided by the very same principles. And that was the impetus for running study 2 here, where we also asked people about how trustworthy they thought that they were. And when we categorize people using these self-perceptions rather than their own behavior, we still saw that same pattern of results. And I don't have time to go into work that we've started to do where we're looking at traits other than trustworthiness. But in a nutshell, we are seeing really similar results where expectations of homophily are a really strong determinant of our expectations of other people's friendships, but less so of our own friendships. And so to return to the questions that I started this part of my talk with, we saw that when encountering people who are familiar to us, people bring to mind knowledge of who that person's friends are. And then they use this knowledge to predict how that person is going to behave and to inform how they're going to treat that person, both when they have little else to go on, like when meeting somebody new for the very first time, and even when they have lots of directly acquired knowledge of that person's own behavior from their own experiences with them that they could entirely go off of. And we also saw that knowing about similarities between people can shape and even distort our memories about who is friends with whom, so that we're more likely to misremember those who had behaved similarly as having been friends with each other. And this may be because we use homophily as a social prior, so we expect that similar people are going to become friends, and we expect that those who are already friends probably got that way, at least in part because of pre-existing similarities. But we seem to use somewhat different criteria to predict our own friendships and to predict other people's friendships. And then the next set of work that I'll tell you about, rather than looking at how people's beliefs about friendship and about homophily interact with their expectations about how other individuals are going to behave, we instead wanted to turn our attention to the phenomenon of homophily itself. And so we wanted to examine what kinds of similarities between people actually predict future friendship in the real world. And so as I alluded to earlier in my talk, sociologists have documented humans' tendency towards homophily, in other words, our tendency to befriend people who are already similar to ourselves across diverse contexts. For example, when it comes to things like age and gender and other demographic variables. But most of us have the sense that our friends aren't just people who match us on certain demographic criteria, like same age, check, same gender, check, and so on. So within demographic groups, most of us resonate with some people more than others, and we often have friends who fall into different demographic categories than our own. Hopefully very often this is the case, but until relatively recently, a lot of evidence for homophily has really been based on pretty coarse variables like demographics, for example. And this is despite the common perception that a lot of us have that we associate with people who we sort of click with, so who respond to things like we do and who might see the world in a similar way. And so for a while, we've been interested in testing this notion. And those of you who were at this workshop last year would have seen me present some cross-sectional evidence linking friendship and more generally proximity in a real-world social network to similarity in how our brains process the world around us. So to set the stage for the new work that I'll present, I'll just briefly summarize those past cross-sectional findings. If you weren't here last year or just don't remember, because of course a lot has happened in the past year, and I don't expect everybody to remember things from a talk like a year ago. So to look at this, we've looked at similarity between people in lots of different ways, including sometimes by looking at how our brains, her neural responses change over time while we experience the world around us, which we try to approximate by doing things like showing people movies while we scan their brains with fMRI. And so this gives us one window into how people's thoughts, emotions, and attention unfold as they're processing these naturalistic stimuli. And so here you can see two people's responses that are relatively in sync at many points. They also happen to be friends. And we found in general particularly close alignment among friends, as you can see here in some of the results that I presented last year. So the warmer colors here signify more similar responses than average for a given brain region, and cooler colors mean less similar responses than average for a given brain region. And so we see the greatest similarity among people who are already friends with each other. So people who are at a social distance of one, just 1 degree of separation from each other in a friendship network. And this is compared to people who are 2 degrees of separation from one another. So people who are friends of friends, so who likely had the chance to befriend one another, but instead ended up 2 degrees of separation from one another or farther removed from one another in social ties. And this is particularly true in areas that are associated with things like how we direct our attention, like the SPL, and how we encode high-level representations of situations, like areas of the default mode network, including the angular gyrus. And I should note here that I'm just showing data from up to 3 degrees of separation in this network, just in the interest of time. But I'm happy to chat more about what happens as people get farther apart afterwards if people are interested. But it's important to note that because all of the work that we had previously done was really looking at people who are already friends with each other, there's this really critical open question, and that's, do we become friends with people who are already like us in how they respond to and presumably see the world, or do we just grow similar to and sort of align ourselves to our friends and to those around us over time? And in what ways does this happen? And so to try to start addressing these kinds of questions, we've been working on some newer longitudinal research where we can tease these things apart, which is what I'll tell you about in the last few minutes of my talk. And so in this study, because we wanted to look at pre-existing similarities in how people's brains respond to the world around them predict future friendship, we recruited people who were just about to move to a new town to start an MBA program, where the vast majority of them were about to move into university-provided housing, where their roommates and housing locations would be randomly assigned, as would their study groups with whom they do most of their schoolwork. And for most of our participants, we were able to scan them within 1 to 3 days of their arrival in this new town. So before they had the chance to meet many people in what would be their new home for the next year or two, much less before they could get to know one another substantially and potentially influence one another. And just like in the prior cross-sectional study that I just showed you a few moments ago, while people were lying in the MRI scanner, we had them watch a wide variety of videos, and we examined how brain activity fluctuated over time in different brain areas. And then we characterized our social network 2 months later. So once they'd attended orientation, had several weeks of classes, and gotten to know and socialize with one another. And then again, 6 months later, so once they'd had much more of a chance to get to know one another and learn who they're compatible with, and so on. And at time 1 of the study, when we were capturing people's neural responses, as in our prior work, we had a few criteria for choosing videos. So we wanted things that participants hadn't likely seen before. We also wanted things that were engaging so that they would recruit a good proportion of the sort of suite of cognitive and emotional processes that characterize our everyday mental life, and also because we wanted to minimize mind wandering, which of course would be a source of noise since different people might mind wander about different things while disengaging. And so the idea was that this would minimize sort of variability between people that would be due to thoughts that are just unrelated to the experiment, to the stimuli that we were showing participants. But we didn't want to squelch intersubject variability in complete terms. We also wanted videos that would introduce some more meaningful variability between people, because different people might interpret them differently or attend to different aspects of them or have different emotional responses to them. So we wanted videos that would minimize uninformative intersubject variability by being engaging, but that would promote more meaningful variability between people. And so we had some things that some people might find sweet or touching or adorable. Others might find kind of sappy or cloying or overly sentimental. Things that might appeal to people with a certain sense of humor, but not to others who might fail to appreciate or even detect the humor. Things that might be understood or parsed differently depending on one's knowledge or one's interests, and arguments that some people might resonate with, but that others might respond to with skepticism or even contempt. And just to give you a sense of participants' experience, I'll show you some brief excerpts of some of the things that participants saw in the scanner. And in the interest of time, these excerpts are just going to be a few seconds long each, but in the actual study, each clip was at least a minute or two long. And this might look familiar to you if you saw me present on our older cross-sectional data set, since we use many of the same stimuli in this longitudinal study with this new sample.
When I was outside on my first spacewalk, I was on the dark side of the world over the Indian Ocean.
And by having workers who only had to do one thing, they could pay them a low wage, and it was very easy to find someone to replace them.
The water squeezes out of the cloth, and then because of the surface tension of the water, it
is insulting when a coach is making 5 to 10 to 15 times more than a college president.
These babies are not strong enough to cling, and they fall to the ground repeatedly.
It's at times like that you don't often think of funny things to say, but I did. And I turned to the rescue workers and I said, "Talk about a rough day at work." That was referring to spending the time up there being pretty rough. Talk about a rough day at work.
Okay, and so while participants watched videos like this, which again were longer than the brief excerpts that you saw there, we measured how activity across the brain rose and fell over time in corresponding brain regions. And so here, the key thing that we were interested in at each time point in this data was as follows. So at time 1, before people had gotten a chance to meet and potentially influence each other yet, we want to characterize their pre-existing neural similarities to each other in this way. And then at time 2, a couple of months later, we want to measure who became friends with whom, and more generally, how far apart each pair of people were in the network. So were they friends? Were they friends of friends? Were they friends of friends of friends? And so on. And also 6 months later, so at time 3, once they had gotten more of a chance to get to know one another and form more stable friend groups. And interestingly, although we don't see much of a relationship between pre-existing neural similarity and subsequent friendship and social distance, when we look at the initial friendships that form, so just 2 months into the school year, when we look at what happens once people have had more of a chance to get to know one another, so 6 months after they first arrived on campus, we see a pretty clear relationship that looks like this. So we're in many regions throughout the brain, particularly in areas of the default mode network that are associated with things like subjective construals and social cognition, and also again in regions that determine things like how we allocate our attention in the world. There is exceptional similarity among people who later go on to be friends or to be relatively closer in social ties. And we see less similarity among people who later go on to end up to be 2 degrees of separation apart in the social network, so friends of friends. And we see far less similarity before people meet one another among pairs of people who go on to end up 3 degrees apart in the social network, which was the maximum distance in this network that existed between people 6 months into the program. And so here we're seeing that similarity in how our brains respond to the world around us, collected before people even meet each other, is linked to if people become friends or not in the future, and how socially close they become after several months have passed, where they've gotten the chance to know one another and figure out who they're compatible with. But what about what I just alluded to? So the changes that happen between time 2 and time 3. So when we enter a new community, you might think that many of our initial social partners are due to external factors or circumstance, like who happens to sit beside us in a sort of event at orientation, or who we happen to be roommates with, or who we get put into a group with at an orientation event. And some of those people we end up staying friends with, but others we end up drifting farther apart from. And in the same vein, as time goes on, we also get the chance to encounter more people who might be particularly similar to us or compatible with us when it comes to things like our tastes, our interests, our senses of humor, and so on. And so we wanted to examine if neural similarity would predict these sorts of phenomena. So in other words, how our friendship networks change over time. And so to answer this question, we looked at what changed and how, and what stayed the same in the social network between time 2 and time 3. So we looked separately at the dyads that grew closer together from 2 months in to 6 months in, and the dyads that drifted farther apart, and also those that stayed the same in terms of their social distance from one another. And when we do this, we see a pattern of results like what I'm showing here, where the pairs of people who became closer in social ties after several months had passed are the people whose neural responses were originally quite similar to each other, even before they met one another, which is reflected in those warmer colors that you're seeing in this panel of the diagram. And the people who drifted farther apart as time passed are people whose brains initially responded to what we showed them in really different ways, which is reflected in the pervasive cooler colors in this panel of the diagram. And the people whose social distances did not change over time are somewhat in the middle here. And if we directly contrast the people who went on to grow further apart versus those that grew closer together in the social network over time, we see many significant differences. So in this image, unlike in the ones that I was showing you before, this time the colors indicate the mean difference in inter-subject correlations between two groups. So the dyads that grew closer over time versus the dyads who drifted farther apart over time. And any cool colors, which you don't see a lot of here, would mean that there was greater pre-existing neural similarity among people who later drifted farther apart compared to those who became closer in social ties as the school year went on. And warmer colors, which really pervade much of the image, convey the opposite. So warmer colors here would mean that those people who grew closer over time were already more similar before they met one another than those who ended up drifting farther apart. And any parcels where this contrast is significant after correcting for multiple comparisons are outlined in black. And you can see that, again, this includes both high-level processing areas involved in things like subjective construal and memory, and also regions involved in attentional allocation, and perhaps as a result of that, lower-level regions involved in visual processing. So here we're seeing that similarity in how your brain processes the world around you predicts not only who you'll become friends with in the future and how close you might end up to others in a social network in the future, but also your closeness to others in terms of how it will shift over time. And so to return to the question that I started this section of my talk with, we can see some evidence that similarity in how our brain processes the world around us is a cause of future friendship and social closeness, since your neural responses to naturalistic stimuli that are measured before you meet new people predicts who you're likely to become socially closer to in the future, particularly once significant time has passed and you have the chance to get to know one another and sort out who you're compatible with. And we're still working on collecting data to examine if and in what ways we grow similar to and sort of align ourselves with our friends over time, as it's likely that both of these factors are likely at play, but we need some more longitudinal fMRI data to examine the second possibility. And so to just briefly zoom out and sum up, hopefully what I've shown you today is that our knowledge about how social networks tend to be structured shapes how we treat new people and how we expect them to behave, and also how we make assumptions and how we remember who is friends with whom. And we also saw that pre-existing similarities between people and more generally, I guess, similarities between how people process the world around them are predictive of who becomes friends and who grows closer in a social network over time. And so in general, whether we're looking at how people think about their social networks, like in the first line of work that I discussed today, or if we're looking at how the ways in which people think shape those social networks, like in that second line of work that I discussed today, we see these really consistent systematic relationships between our cognition as individuals and the webs of social relationships that surround each of us. And so with that, I just want to quickly thank the many people involved in the research that I've been telling you about today, including members of my own lab and our collaborators at other institutions and my former mentors. And I should especially thank Miriam and Mung, who led the first set of studies that I discussed, and Lisa and Ryan and Talia and Adam, who all worked together on the last study that I presented, and our funding sources, and of course you all for your time and attention. And I'm happy to take any questions or suggestions or thoughts that you might have in the time that we have left.
Okay, thank you very much, Carolyn, for your talk. It's amazing. First, I'm using the same shirt as I was in your example. And also, thank you for saying that I'm a trustworthy partner. Yeah, I'm happy to hear that. And I need to, you are super trustworthy. So you say, oh, I'm not. Yeah, you are super. So thank you very much. And when I read, the first time I read that paper about similarity and friendship some years ago, the first paper you published about that, I thought that, oh my God, this is the best paper. I think I told you that this is the best paper I ever had. It's a great idea. It's a great design, everything. And today you just show that you can go even further. This experiment you just show now about the cause and consequence. Oh my God, this is beautiful. This is beautiful. Yeah, it's amazing.
I wish you were a reviewer.
I'm not a reviewer. Yeah, if I was the reviewer, it was approved with no.
I'm just joking.
No, I would love to be the reviewer. Just say, approve it as it is. So that would be my review, because it's beautiful, because that paper, you finished that paper asking these questions about cause and consequence and something like that, and now you are answering with a super cool experiment, elegant. Well, I'm quite impressed, Carolyn. It's beautiful stuff, and the data is amazing. So I'm really looking forward to see this paper published. It'll be a huge buzz in the area. I think people will love it as well. So thank you very much for sharing this with us. It was amazing. I really love it. When you show the design about time 1, time 2, I start thinking, oh my God, is she going to show us that time 1 will predict it? Oh my God. And then you start showing the cause and all the things. So it's amazing. Thank you for sharing this with us. It was great.
Thank you.
And so let's see if people have some questions. Fernanda has a question.
Wait, I'm waiting for the camera to focus on me. I don't think it's gonna be possible, so I'm just gonna.
Oh, here.
Connect your call.
Here's mine.
Yeah, thanks. So first of all, thank you so much for your presentation. It's nice seeing you again.
Nice to see you.
Yeah, it's really nice to hear from you, because I think, I mean, I always get mesmerized by the studies you present. I'm always like, oh my God, how did they think of that? This is so, like, it's such a good way to investigate that. So it's really nice to hear it. And one thing that we have in Brazil, we don't say birds of a feather flock together. We say, tell me who you walk alongside with, and I'll tell you who you are. And your first study proved that, because if people think someone's trustworthy, they think their friends are going to be trustworthy and they're going to cooperate or not with them. So it's really nice to see that happening. And I was wondering if you think that people who are trustworthy or that consider themselves trustworthy have neural similarities, and if we can predict that or deduce that from the last study you presented, maybe that we are going to cooperate more and help more people that we also think that are trustworthy, if we think we are trustworthy ourselves. I don't know if that made sense. Hope so.
Yeah, so that's a really interesting question. And thank you for your kind words, by the way. Yeah, I think so. We're using that. Would people who are trustworthy have similar neural responses? Yeah, I think that would be really interesting to look at. I think because there is, I think, an opportunity to look at a broader diversity of traits or individual difference variables and how they relate to neural similarity, especially with methods introduced by people like Emily Finn, where you can look at like if not just if people who are similar in terms of both trustworthy or both untrustworthy have similar neural responses, but maybe the people who are similar, or rather who are trustworthy, have pretty similar neural responses, but maybe the people who are untrustworthy, they might have like variable neural responses if there's different reasons why different people tend to be untrustworthy related to like different factors that might make them like need money more or just be less pro-social for other reasons, or if there's just a different, like if there's a variety of roots to being untrustworthy, you might see a relationship that looks like what Emily Finn describes like a Anna Karenina effect, where there's like one way to be like trustworthy and many ways to be untrustworthy. I think that'd be really interesting. I don't know of work that's looked at that, but I think it would be really interesting.
Yeah, great. Yeah, it really makes sense. So anyway, just thank you for your talk. And Nicole has another question.
Hi, Dr. Parkinson. I think the camera's updating now, but this is my first time hearing you talk. I've read some of your papers, so it's really cool hearing everything put together and having a cohesive image. But I had a question regarding some of your like interpretations of the fMRI studies. So when you have like two people seeing the same video and they're having similar neural responses, do you think that those responses are related to how they process the stimuli, or if it's rather like their perception, they're having similar perceptions of the world, like you had said? I don't know if that makes sense.
Yeah, I would guess that it varies depending on the brain region that you're looking at, and perhaps to an extent the stimuli that you're looking at. Like, and I guess sometimes there's a fine line between what is perception and interpretation, since there's so much subjectivity in even aspects of low level perception. But I think that some of the results that we see in lower level areas, like in some of the early visual processing areas that were shown in the last set of neural results that I showed you, I would guess that has to do with differences in what grabs people's attention that end up coloring what time series look like in early visual processing areas. So if you're really interested, for example, in the documentary clip about outer space or something, you might see greater responses in early processing areas when viewing that kind of clip, that because we're looking at continuous time series across all the videos, might end up making you look more similar to other people who have similar interests. But I think some of the results, especially in areas of like the DMN, that people like Yuri Hassan and Yara Yasharin have shown are related to similar construals of narratives in terms of looking at intersubject correlations of time series in those areas. So they've shown with using auditory narratives, so people listening to a short story, or people viewing video narratives, so clips from a movie or a TV show, that people who end up interpreting something in the same way have really similar neural response time series in areas like the angular gyrus and parts of posterior medial cortex. And so those results might be showing similar phenomena to what we're seeing in the same regions in our studies. But I think it is important going forward to try and test some of the questions that you're asking more directly. And so kind of thinking along the same lines as it seems like you were thinking about when asking the questions, we've started to include some more post-scan questions to try and see if any of the effects in particular brain regions can be partially accounted for by particular kinds of similarities in how people interpreted the stimuli. And so that's still ongoing, but I think it will be important to try and make more sense of the results.
Yeah, no, that makes a lot of sense. I was wondering because me and another partner here at the lab and Thayani, we're trying to do a study about emotional regulation. So we're having like two people interact in a similar task, and one of the things we were worried about was whether the similarities in neural responses are just because they're engaged in the similar a task, or rather they're having similar perceptions of the stimuli. So it's interesting to think about that, and hopefully we'll hear some responses from you soon that'll help guide us in our work too.
Yeah, I guess, I mean, if everyone's in the same, I guess if you can relate it to some other variable where you see like some outcome variables related to the magnitude of the similarities, if everybody's in the same task as their partner, then that would be helpful, I think, if you see like success at emotion regulation is related to some sort of, if you're interested in similarity in the neural data, looking at that continuum, it seems like tractable.
No, yeah, exactly what you're saying. We've been trying to like think about this in a different way, but it's really nice to hear from you and hear about your studies. So thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for your question.
Thank you. We have another question now.
Hi, Professor. So nice to meet you.
Nice to meet
I
you.
was very interested in your work because I have a really hard time making friends. And so I wrote this question.
Really?
Yeah.
Okay.
I thought you knew. And so can people who are, for example, neurologically different grow to get neurologically similar over time? And would that necessarily mean that they would grow closer together? Or that maybe there's a bigger chance for them to stay apart?
Oh, that's a really good question, and something I've been thinking about recently. We're sort of writing kind of proposals along these lines, and my guess would be that just making somebody similar to others in terms of how their brain is responding to stimuli might not make it easier to become friends, but maybe fostering like flexibility in how you might see things, so that's easier to find common ground with people and see things how they might see them and appreciate their perspective. That might be a more successful intervention. And so there's some evidence that, for example, people with depression like might be a little bit more rigid in how they interpret things, and they also suffer social disconnection. And so one idea we've been kind of tinkering with is if we could try and foster like perspective shifting abilities among people, if that would help them to then connect with others. But it's still TBD. We don't know the results yet, but I think that's a really great question and something we've been thinking about a lot.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I think you're muted.
Likely friend to you than your actual like close friend. It's so fascinating. I've never really thought about that, and maybe I'll go after my set of my friends. That's that's really interesting. Thanks so much.
Oh, thank you. Some of the audio was cutting in and out, but I think I got the gist. So thank you for your questions and thoughts.
Thank you so much.
Okay, we have I think it's the last question, I think. I have a last question. This question is from Adriano. So he's asking, do you believe that similar results could be found across various social groups, such as individuals with different religious beliefs and those who identify as atheists? And then he said that he plans to collect data from religious participants inspired by your study designs. Could you suggest any control measures that might improve the reliability of this type of study? So Adriano is a postdoctoral researcher at the Coordinate Group at Federal University of ABC. Looks like Jackson 5 years ABC. And also, this is a great song for next year if you come to Brazil to the karaoke. Okay? The karaoke.
Yeah, that's one thing missing from the Zoom. Yeah, that's a great question.
Okay.
I think one set of relevant studies to the idea about comparing people from different religious groups could be some of the work that's come out over the past few years, contrasting people with different political identities, although that, to my knowledge, has all been done within the context of the US political system, where there's like these two groups essentially. But there's been some work from Jamil Zaki's lab and Oriel Feldman-Hall's lab that has done a really nice job of looking at these differences and also looking at, for example, if in some cases, if the neural similarity that is predictive of beliefs in that context is general across relevant and irrelevant stimuli, or more specific to stimuli related to the political issues that divide people. So one suggestion could be to try and include both sets of stimuli that are relevant to their beliefs and that are just more general, to try and get a sense of if people are just processing things differently, even as a function of what religious belief group they belong to, in a more general sense, or just with respect to stimuli that are directly related to those beliefs. I think that would be really interesting. And maybe, I guess, I wonder if it, given, I don't know the extent to which religious identities map onto political identities in that context, but I wonder if it could also be good to have those sorts of variables as control variables, just to help differentiate the work from the other. I'm sure it is very different, just to drive the point home. This is a really different phenomenon. Yeah, and it could also be interesting to perhaps get people's post-scan assessments of the videos in terms of their interests, what they found enjoyable, and what they remember about them, to try and have something that complements the neural results. It's based on their explicit self-reports.
That's great. Thank you. Thank you very much. I think we don't have any further questions. Okay. So Carolyn, thank you again. Thank you for sharing this new study. And again, it's beautiful science, Great.
Thank you so much. Thank you for
You
having
know, I
me.
mean it, yeah. And I felt Talia the first time I read that paper, and to you too. And this new experiment you just showed us today is brilliant. It's beautiful. So thank you for sharing it with us. And thank you again for joining us in this second edition of the Rethinking the Future.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me. It's so much fun to talk with you guys.
Yeah, thank you, and see you.
Nice to see you.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye-bye.